how we're going to address this module, as well as thinking about electives, is a little bit tricky. So first of all, we're going to go through all of the kind of ideas that you need to know in order to talk about representation in text, and then we're going to go through and have a look at the electives and really how you're supposed to mesh them all together. So the first thing you need to know is your text type conventions. There is a conventional format for every text type, and any deviations from that conventional text type are pretty much on purpose, and they expect you to notice them. So they might be there to alter the way you perceive the text. So what this means is that you must know the techniques that go with your text type and how they work on an audience. So this might be a kind of weird concept to you to be thinking, oh, I don't think the medium does anything. But the difference between how we view our assumptions is actually quite strong. So think about the assumptions you make on a text. So this is thinking about how the composer takes advantage of it. So looking at a newspaper, we'd think, okay, it's true, and a poem we might think is false. But obviously those things might not be true. Newspapers can get their facts wrong when they present it on the day, and a poem could be telling the complete truth and not have any kind of bias in it at all. But even saying that out loud, it feels a little bit wrong. You don't think like that when you look at the two texts. A really good example of this is the radio play that Orson Welles put on with War of the Worlds in 1938. So they got on the radio broadcast, which was the major way that people heard the news in those days, and they talked about Martians attacking Earth and dropping bombs and all sorts of things. And because this was presented in terms of a news report, people took it seriously. They believed it. They started panicking, they worried about leaving their homes, and basically there was a huge riot because of it. So what this shows you is that if you can get on TV or if you can get on the radio and you can look or sound serious and you say something, most likely people are going to believe you. The next thing you want to do is identify the perspectives in a text. So the first perspective you're thinking about is the point of view or the voice of the text. So in a novel, this might be like a third-person authorial voice. It could even just be the way the plot's been arranged. It could be the camera work if you're looking at the director and how they lead you from one idea to the next. All of those things might have a particular bias. It could also just be the narrator or the main character. So figure out whether this person is likable and believable and what their message is. Then you have to think about, does the composer really want me to agree with this voice or disagree? So if we have a main character in a story, there's no guarantee that you're actually supposed to like them. You might actually be supposed to dislike them. And in fact, a lot of TV shows work on the fact that all of their major characters are dislikable, and it's kind of that dysfunction that makes it interesting. It can often help to do some biographical research so that you know the experience and the politics of your composer. That will kind of help you see if they're going to have any leaning or bias and what that might be. So then you want to look at all the other characters. Examine each of them carefully, the same way that you would use to gauge if a friend of yours was lying to you. So the things you want to ask are they stable? Do they have a history of morality? Do they present their ideas objectively or subjectively? Do they play on your emotions? Sometimes it can be really hard to tell which character a composer wants you to look at, particularly in a play. Sometimes because all the characters have their own voices and there's no real obvious narrative voice, you might find that you're not really sure who you're supposed to go with. But basically, if you sit down and look at the characters both objectively and subjectively, you can draw your own conclusions. There will also be some journalistic styles of text or non-fiction styles that are giving you both sides deliberately to let you draw your own conclusions. So this could be a factor too. Even in this case though, you'll find that there is mild bias. So that could be in the language of the text, really subtly, or it could even be in terms of content, how much time they spend on one side of the argument and how much time they spend on the other. So you may also choose to side with the characters that are not objective. So sometimes they'll make you feel sorry for them, and don't feel too worried about that. It's okay to feel sorry for a character and end up siding with them. Objective and rational doesn't always mean right. Just make sure that if you are feeling sympathy, you understand how they caused you to feel the sympathy, and you can explain it clearly to the marker. That's what we're looking for. The final thing to think about in representation in text is the kind of keywords you're going to use. Because the electives are really full on, you're going to find yourself probably talking more about conflicting perspectives in history and memory in class. And it's really easy to push the rep and text stuff to the background and to not really mention it much in the essay. So one of the really easy ways to make sure that you've talked about representation in text is to choose some of these sorts of keywords to look at. So you want to think about words like construction of meaning, point out conventions, talk about assumptions maybe, and make sure that you're responding to the module that way. Phrases like representation, choice of language, deliberate emphasis, influences meaning, objective and subjective language, bias, motives, intended and unintended messages. All of these things are the kinds of phrases you should be using to deconstruct the way you've looked at the text and how you feel about it now.